On CNN Newsnight with Abby Phillip, Adam Mockler once again found himself outnumbered, this time facing off against pro-Trump voices defending Donald Trump's Iran war. But what was supposed to be a pile-on quickly turned into another moment where the argument against the war started to unravel in real time.
Good evening, I'm Abby Phillip in New York. Here's a sign that we are in America's Iran war. The president who started it can't remember how long it's been going on.
We have a war right now, and we're to 6 weeks? They said, what's taking so long?
Not quite. We are in the 10th week of the war and the third month, with no end in sight, frankly. Donald Trump may not be keeping track, but Americans certainly are, via their gas prices. It's hit another high today, and one expert says that you can expect to see $5 at a pump if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't open soon. Now, the president is also dismissing how unpopular the war is.
They give me fake polls. They tell me about polls and this. You know, it's interesting. I did a poll on the war with Iran, and they said only 32% of the people like it. Well, I don't like it, and I don't like war at all. They said 32% of the people are against President Trump. Well, when you explain it, like, is it okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon? It wouldn't be 32%. But even if you said that, there'd be a 32% because the polls are fake. I mean, they're totally fake.
For the reality, at the start of the war, Americans were pretty evenly divided in their support for the conflict. But now, 61% say that the campaign in Iran was a mistake. And there is a clear generational gap, too. While older Americans are split, 61% under the age of 35 oppose the war. And 80% of those under 30 say there were no sufficient reasons to attack Iran in the first place, while 51% over the age of 65 say that there were. So this generational divide, I think, when it comes to war, has always been a thing in America, but it seems particularly acute right now, Adam.
Yeah, for my entire life, the United States has been at war with some country in the Middle East, and young people have constantly been told that this will make us safer and make us better off. When we look around at the world today, we are less safe and we are worse off. Millennials grew up watching all of these headlines saying that Iraq had been, defeated, that we had taken out Saddam Hussein and we had killed all the bad guys. Well, that turned into a grinding counterinsurgency that cost us $1 trillion, and it was a catastrophe. The same thing happened with Afghanistan. And now Gen Zers are going through the same thing with Iran. We are watching the same people who defended these first two failed wars go on television and defend another failed war. This war is failing. We have not gotten any political concessions. And I'm sorry, I'm not buying this trust the process line. I don't trust the same people who got us into the prior wars, amassed trillions of dollars in debts, and are not putting America first on the global stage.
So putting aside, perhaps for a moment, even the politics of this current moment, I mean, is it fair for young people to have that level of distrust of the people, to Adam's point, who maybe defended the last war and were wrong and are defending this war too?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, honestly, Adam, that's immensely ungrateful to American service personnel and the people who keep us safe every day. After 9/11, it was by no means guaranteed that there would be no mass casualty terrorist attack on American soil in the immediate aftermath of that attack, especially since we had events in Madrid, in London, etc. And after the attack on Iraq and the elimination of Saddam Hussein's regime, we took a terrorist-supporting enterprise off the map. We don't talk about Iraq anymore as a threat to a national security because it isn't. And those who would pretend as though Iran is not a national security threat and are just frankly dismissive of the extent to which American service personnel get up every day to stop these people from executing the attacks on American and their allies that they plan every single day. This is a thorn in our side. It absorbs a lot of American taxpayer dollars, to say nothing of the energy of our service personnel. And I just think it's just ungrateful
I am so
to say
grateful.
that the service personnel are not keeping you safe when they are.
No, I feel less safe due to the actions of our leaders. I am incredibly grateful for our servicemen. You're doing
your feelings don't make it a fact.
Wait, listen. You are doing
feelings. The way you feel doesn't make it a fact.
You are doing.
We are more
let me
safe
finish.
with Iran
He was talking to me. He was talking to me.
Hold on a second, Hal. I'll let you respond.
No one was talking to me.
Let him finish his thought.
You are doing the exact same thing that I just laid out in the opening. You are telling young people they shouldn't be asking questions. They shouldn't be questioning the people in power because it's ungrateful.
Questions about the nature of the
Okay,
Iranian
then what was
threat.
ungrateful about what I said? I said that the leaders are making us less safe, and I can prove that. Right now, Iran has control over the Strait of Hormuz, and that is a weapon they didn't have control of 2 months ago.
Of course they did. They shut down the Strait of Hormuz in the 80s. And we opened it up in the 80s.
And by the way,
there was free
Iran
passage
with
to
a
the
nuclear weapon. You think gas prices are high right now? Iran with a nuclear weapon, we'd have unlimitedly high gas prices. They would take control of the Strait of Hormuz, and they would blackmail the world.
And how much farther away are they from having a nuclear weapon? Where's the enriched uranium right now?
They're non-existent.
Where's the enriched uranium
We're
right
going
now?
to get the enriched uranium.
No, where is it? I want you to answer.
It's buried right now. But
where is it buried?
You're asking me. I'm not in the classified briefings, and neither are you. So just be quiet for a minute and let me
know
finish.
It's buried in Iran.
Let me finish.
Okay, Adam,
we are more safe than we were before we took out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Absolutely more safe. The Strait of Hormuz is going to be open, and Iran's not going to control it. That is absolutely going to happen. It doesn't matter if it's 2 weeks or 2 months.
It does actually matter because economists are saying if it's closed for a few more months, then we're going to go into a recession. So it does matter. It absolutely does matter.
No one's predicting that because the markets that are all-time high.
No one's predicting that?
The markets that are an all-time high, the markets aren't predicting it.
With the oil markets?
The inflation rate has stayed where it is. And by the way,
what was inflation
by the way, unemployment has stayed low. So when you're talking about everyone's predicting this.
Can you look the average American in the eye?
Just to be clear, inflation has ticked up.
Yes.
It has not stayed the same. But Bobby, you were around for the politics and the conflict of the last two Middle East wars. I mean, what do you make of this generational debate about whether it's wise to be going into another conflict in this region?
Well, I can't fault the logic that when you've seen this happen through your lifetime and you're still living with the consequences of it in one fashion or the other, you're bound to be reluctant to get into the war. Nobody is disputing for the fact that, for a moment, that the Iranian regime are bad guys. But when you hear the president and our leadership constantly changing the explanation they're giving for why we're at war, constantly changing the timetable of how long this is going to last, and then forgetting how long it has been going on, then you're right to push back and say, kindly give us a clearer explanation for why we're there, how long we're going to be there for. It's not enough to say, sit at this table and say, it'll be over, and then the Straits of Hormuz will be open. We've got no indication of that being the case. When the straits were closed, we were told this is a matter of days. Now it's been a matter of weeks, and we're no closer to it being open than we were 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago.
And on top of what you're saying there, I mean, I think one of the big problems with where we are in this conflict is that very clearly the administration has determined, because they've basically ended the kinetic conflict of it all, they've determined that the only way to actually get the things that we want, which is Iran abandoning its nuclear ambitions, moving away from funding terrorism, is to get to the negotiating table, which is the same truth that existed a year ago after they did the first set of strikes. So, I mean, I think that's part of the problem, is that war has not necessarily gotten us the outcome that they say that we are trying to get here.
No, and that's because the rationale for the war has shifted multiple times. No one here has ever said we want a nuclear-armed Iran. That is a red herring at this point, because it's the only talking point that the pro-Trump folks have, because they've gotten themselves into a situation that they were unprepared for. And what's incredibly ungrateful, you know who's incredibly ungrateful? Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, for the men and women who are serving in this war, who are on deployments that are extra long, who are not getting their ships resupplied, who don't understand what they're doing over there, who are being taken for granted. Our military is the greatest in the world, and the men and women who serve are the greatest in the world, and they are being taken for granted as props in a political effort by Donald Trump to make himself feel better till he can distract from everything else that's going on domestically. And now he's gotten himself into a situation where he can't even explain cogently why we're there, what's going on, and why the American people should have to pay the price for it. So that's what's going on here. I mean, when I was a Republican for many years, we absolutely looked at Iran as the threat that it is, and absolutely were trying to do things to make sure that they did not continue to be the world's sponsor of terror. But this isn't it. This is not it.
Noah, you talked about Adam, you accused Adam of being ungrateful. I just want you to look at these charts. Look at what happened to public opinion when it came to the war in Afghanistan. Was it a mistake for the U.S. to send military forces to Afghanistan? The war started out as incredibly popular, and then it became much less popular. So about half of Americans said that it was a mistake, and about half said that it was not. The same is true of Iraq. incredibly popular, right decision, 72%, back at the beginning of it. And by the end of the conflict in 2014, it was down to 38%. I mean, are all of these Americans ungrateful? I mean, I imagine many of them they ended up tasting the consequences of the war, including the impacts on their lives, people that they knew, people who may not have even lost their lives in theater but came back forever scarred by it. I mean,
to clarify what I had said previously is that it is, in my view, ungrateful to American service personnel to say that they have not kept us safe when we do not measure.
That's not what I said.
But he didn't say that. So you have to acknowledge
No. He's saying that we can measure non-events, which is to suggest that the attacks that have not happened, which none of us are aware of, were not avoidable. Because of the nature of these conflicts. And the conflicts themselves are what inspires the attacks. It's almost inviting the notion that America is responsible for the terrorist.
That's not really the argument that he's making. The argument that he's making is that the people who made the arguments to go into these conflicts in the first place misled, which is a fact. And secondly, that the conflicts ended up lasting a very long time, costing a lot of American treasure, and those are also facts. So he didn't say it's because they're they didn't keep us safe. That's not actually what he said.
Well, that is kind of what he said. But let's not belabor the point. I have all the time in the world for criticisms of the president's rhetoric. All the time in the world. In fact, I think a lot of the reasons why the public is soured on this is because the president never approached Americans and solicited their support, told them the burdens they were expected to bear, and told them why they were going into this. But as important as it is to criticize the president's rhetoric, it's also important to talk about what's happening on the ground, and we are closer today to opening up the strait by virtue of what we heard from Admiral Brad Cooper today and the operation that was engaged over the course of the last 24 hours. Very important. We can't just glaze over the fact that the United States is transiting the Strait of Hormuz. We can't talk about today's events.
And then I want Bobby to have the last word.
Well, I covered the war in Iraq. I was there for all the arguments going into that war in Iraq. I remember people saying this was the major sponsor of terror. And you pointed to 9/11. Iraq had nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. And going into Iraq and toppling that regime, as much as I hated the regime as any right-thinking people, spawned from the direct consequence of that the Islamic State, also a terrorist group that came directly out of our actions in Iraq. So, if we want to look at historical precedents, we should not cherry-pick little bits out of a larger picture and pretend that the larger picture doesn't.
I also want to
spill over the Syrian.
To expand on my framework, I gave a very good faith criticism of this war and of the history of these types of wars. And I had one person say that I was ungrateful, and then another invoke the weapons of mass destruction that Iran could potentially be developing. What I was trying to say is that getting military successes, if you want to call them that, doesn't always translate to helpful outcomes for the American people. We've seen this. We killed Saddam Hussein. We took out the bad guy, and it hurt us.
It's arguable that this war is the most just war since World War II, because Iran has killed thousands of Americans. Saddam Hussein hadn't killed thousands of Americans. Afghanistan hadn't either.
But he ran on no new wars.
No, I'm saying
he ran on no new wars.
Yeah, but it was so justified. Why didn't he take it to the Congress?
He should have ran on it. It's a 47-year war, I thought.
Why didn't he take it to the Congress and the American people if it was so justified?
Ultimately, he may do that, but
ultimately, why didn't he do that
120
before
days.
the bombs were
He has a War
dropping?
Powers Act.
Didn't say he had to. I'm using your own logic where you said it was so justified, the most just war since World War II. Then why didn't he go ahead and present it to the American people that way?
Iran has killed thousands of Americans.
We know this. We've established this.
Okay? Iran is a threat to the world. Okay, if they get nuclear weapons, they would control the Strait of Hormuz anytime they wanted to, and people wouldn't be able to do anything about it.
They do
if
not
you think
need
we have high oil prices now, we're going to have skyrocketing.
They do not need nuclear weapons to control the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz are right there. You can't change geography. They need small speedboats. They just need to issue a threat. What happened in the last few weeks? They didn't do anything. All they had to say was, we're going to shut the straits, and the markets did the rest. The insurance companies refused to insure ships. Shipping companies refused to go. They do not need nuclear weapons to shut the straits.
That is resolvable in the Horn of Africa and the Strait of Malacca. It's resolvable in Hormuz.
All right, Bobby.
What this segment ultimately lays bare is not just a disagreement over foreign policy, it's a collapse in how one side is even attempting to argue that policy in the first place. Because if you strip away the noise, the interruptions, and the talking points, Adam Mockler is making a very straightforward case. Recent history has shown that military interventions in the Middle East often come with massive costs, unclear objectives, and outcomes that don't match the promises made at the start. That's not a radical claim. That's a documented pattern stretching from the Iraq War to the war in Afghanistan. And instead of confronting that pattern head on, what do his opponents do? They default to 3 predictable moves. Moral framing, you're ungrateful. Fear escalation, nuclear weapons, global catastrophe. Deflection, markets are strong, things are fine. None of those actually address the argument being made. Take the ungrateful line. It's not just weak, it's deliberately misleading. Mockler explicitly states he respects and is grateful for service members. His criticism is directed at leadership decisions. Conflating those two things is not an honest mistake, it's a tactic. Because if you can successfully blur that line, you don't have to defend the policy, you just have to question the patriotism of the person criticizing it. That's not debate, that's avoidance. Then you get to the nuclear argument, the constant fallback. What if Iran gets a nuclear weapon? It's presented as a conversation ender, but it actually raises more questions than it answers. If that threat is so immediate and so urgent, why is there so little clarity when Mockler asks simple follow-ups like, where is the enriched uranium? How close are they really? What has actually changed as a result of this war? And the answer he gets, we're going to get it, isn't just weak, it's revealing. Because it shows that the certainty being projected isn't backed by specifics. It's posture. It's confidence without clarity. And that's a dangerous combination, especially when you're talking about war. Now layer on the economic reality being discussed. You have rising gas prices, warnings about the Strait of Hormuz, and real concerns about broader economic impact. And what's the counter? The markets are at an all-time high.
That's not just out of touch, it's politically tone deaf, because the average person isn't measuring their well-being by stock market indices, they're measuring it at the pump, at the grocery store, in their monthly bills. So when that's the response, it reinforces the perception that the people defending this policy are disconnected from the actual consequences it's having on everyday Americans. And this is where the generational divide becomes critical. Younger Americans, Mockler's cohort, aren't reacting emotionally. They're reacting historically. They've watched these patterns play out. They've seen wars sold with confidence, justified with urgency, and then dragged out with shifting goals and mounting costs. So when they hear the same language being used again, they don't hear strength, they hear repetition. That's why the trust the process argument falls flat. Because trust isn't automatic, it's earned. And when the same institutions, the same voices, and in many cases the same individuals were involved in past failures, skepticism becomes not just reasonable, but necessary. What makes this exchange even more telling is how often Mockler is interrupted, talked over, or reframed. That's not accidental either. It reflects a broader discomfort with losing control of the narrative. Because when he's allowed to speak uninterrupted, the argument is coherent, grounded, and difficult to dismiss. And that's the real issue here. It's not that his opponents have no argument, it's that their argument doesn't hold up under sustained scrutiny. So instead of strengthening it, they shift tactics, they personalize, they generalize, they escalate hypotheticals, anything to avoid staying in the lane of verifiable outcomes. Meanwhile, the most effective moment in the entire exchange comes from a simple point. Military action does not automatically translate into beneficial outcomes for the American people. That's it. That's the core. You can win battles and still lose strategically. You can remove threats and create new ones. You can achieve short-term objectives and still end up worse off in the long run. That's not theory, that's recent history. And when that point is made, clearly and calmly, without theatrics, it exposes just how fragile the opposing argument really is. Because if the best defense of a war is wait and see, trust us, and it could be worse, then you're not defending a success, you're managing doubt. So what you're seeing in this clip isn't just a young commentator winning a debate. It's a shift in how these conversations are being approached. Less deference, more direct questioning, less acceptance of vague answers, more demand for specifics. And that shift matters, because it forces a higher standard, it forces clarity, it forces accountability. And judging by how this exchange unfolded, that's exactly the kind of pressure that certain arguments and certain people are not prepared to handle.